Have you ever thought about buying a house at auction? Well, I think today's video is going to be really enlightening for you because I think that a lot of people run into some really silly mistakes when it comes to actually purchasing a house at an auction, and I want to give you a little bit of insight from the septic world of what do you need to worry about. So let's set the stage here real quick. We have a house that is at auction, and it is in a known bad area for soil. Bad soil means bad perk rate, which means you're gonna get an expensive and or very difficult system to install or to maintain. In every area of every county, there are gonna be hot spots where maybe there's a lot of clay. Maybe there's a high water table. Maybe you're in a swamp and you can't have a traditional septic system. So you have to get innovative. A perk test is just to see how fast does that water actually dissipate into the soil. When they're doing a perk test, they're essentially gonna dig a few holes and they're gonna fill those holes with water and they're gonna see what kind of soil is in said hole. From there, you're able to actually design whatever system that you need based off of how fast that water dissipates into the ground. If you have a system with a lot of clay, sometimes you end up with a thing called a sand mound, which is what we're dealing with today. A sand mound is basically where you have the absorption system above the surface on a raised mound of sand. It's in the name. Simple, crazy, I know. Let's talk a little bit about sand mounds. You may be wondering, what do they even look like? And today we have ourselves a prime example of a sand mound, but also what not to do with a sand mound. So let's take a quick peek here real quick. If we look, we can actually see that the ground is raised compared to the rest of it. So we have this large hump in the ground. If we look, you'll see that there's a difference between the elevation of the main ground and the sand mound itself. Let's talk about why this is important. When you have bad soil like clay, you have to bring soil onto the property and build up so that way you can disperse the liquid more effectively. A sand mound is similar to a drain field, except for whereas a drain field uses only the beginning part and it's all gravity fed, a sand mound is going to be pressurized. You're going to use the entirety of the sand mound the entire time by using a pump. Most sand mounds will usually be 30 feet wide and about 60-ish feet long. Sometimes they're 90 feet. It just depends on the soil and your design spec. These types of systems actually require a whole different set of licensing in order to be installed. In our state, Maryland, you actually have to take an entirely different course to get certified by the state to be able to install these types of systems because they're so complicated and because there's a lot of things that you have to think about when it comes to the actual construction of the mound. The primary thing you have to think about is compaction of the soil below where you're putting it. If you compact all of that bad soil even further, it makes it where the system's gonna have to work harder and the sand mound may not even be viable anymore if you do that incorrectly. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on with this particular house. We have an issue that doesn't really come up too often, and that issue is gonna be trees. When we look down here, we can see that they have all of these trees planted all over the sand mound. We even got that little one right over there. We got all of these trees. Why is that problematic? When we have these systems installed, they're very delicate. Remember, you can't drive over the soil while you're installing it. You also can't build on it. You can't plant anything on it because the pipes in this system are really, really, really tiny with tiny little holes. And you're pumping a whole bunch of nitrogen-rich water right up to the tree. Sewer water is basically fertilizer for any plant material. So if you leave a bunch of it in the ground, guess what the plants are going to do? They're going to grow around it. If you get enough of them to grow around it, now you start running into some issues where maybe that pipe gets plugged up. If the pipe gets plugged up enough, you might even have the issue of it going back towards the septic tank or worst case coming up to the surface. Where does that come from? If we look over here, you're going to see this little pipe right there. That's called a turnip. These generally stick up out of the ground by about, 6 inches to a foot, depending on who installed it. But you see how it's cockeyed? That means somebody hit it at some point, especially with those little black scuff marks on it. And so what that means is that they're probably leaking a lot of that liquid underneath of the ground, and it's probably going to be asking for roots to get in there, especially if the house sits vacant for a while. You can also see the roots are actually quite big on this particular system. This brings us back to, okay, so you're buying a house at auction, now what? When you're buying a house at auction, it's very important to make sure that you're doing your due diligence, such as inspections, title search, any kind of liens or any kind of shenanigans that are going on with this particular property. And then also just a general walkthrough to make sure the house hasn't been flooded or burned down. It's mind-blowing how often I go to a auction and the house is missing the entire back wall. It's just exposed and open. But the photos, they make it look like it's complete and not missing one of the 4 walls that actually make the structure. If you don't actually show up and look at the house, you might find yourself in a bit of a pickle. With this particular one, we're looking at the septic system to make sure that before anything's purchased, we know what we're working with and we're not walking into a mess. A sand mound generally will cost you somewhere close to $40,000 to $50,000 to install. With that many trees on it, that much roots, once you start digging it up to look at the pipes, you might be replacing most of the whole system, if not all of it, depending on how bad the root intrusion actually is. The same goes for water. If you have a property that has a well, you should also be taking a look is mechanically, does that thing actually work and produce water? Because if you don't have water, guess what? It's gonna be really hard to do your drywall, to do any of your painting, to do most of your projects on site, unless you bring water to the property, which just adds an additional expense to your entire project. Nobody wants additional expenses, especially with nowadays how expensive houses are. A lot of times you're gonna end up where you're very tight on budget. The big thing with auctions is a lot of times they don't let you show up to do inspections. So when you do get the opportunity to look at the house, take every chance you can, get a walk and talk with a contractor, take a video of the whole property, like literally walk around, videotape every corner of it, so that way you can do your research and you can come up with a good budget for what you're going to do to repair the house. When I was looking at one house, I had an issue where when we went into the basement, we didn't realize that apparently there were a lot of cracks in the foundation. Normally surface cracks, easy enough to deal with, but when I went for the walkthrough, it was pouring outside. That basement had so much water in it that I had plans on finishing it and making it into a livable area. Well, if I planned on doing that, guess what? Now I've got to address all that additional water that was going into the house. When you have water going through a foundation, that increases the chance of mold. So not only would I have to do foundation repair, waterproofing, and general cleanup, now I would also have to consider, do I need to treat for the mold that potentially grew, because Lord knows how long that water had been getting in that basement. Now, this was in an old house, so the one I'm at now is not old. It's only 20 years old, so it's not terrible. But if you're looking at any auction at all, you want to do as much informational research as physically possible to make sure you don't buy a lemon. When it comes to the auction itself, it's very important to make sure you know exactly what your max budget number is, and once you hit that number, do not let the auction kind of get your emotions and start bidding it up. I've worked for plenty of clients that were easily 6 figures plus in the hole because they got a little carried away with the auction. Auctions are fun. A lot of times you can get very emotional and very excited because everybody's bidding up the number, and if you really like the house, if you've already done a lot of the homework, you've probably spent 20 hours researching this property. It would suck to lose all 20 hours worth of work because somebody outbid you. But when it comes to making money, if you're going to overpay for something, you better be ready to start making some very tough choices on your budget and or your profit line. I know we covered a lot of ground on this one. We talked about purchasing a house on auction, inspecting a septic system, and then we also got a problem with the sand mound itself. If you enjoy this kind of content, hit that like button, hit subscribe. I have more videos posted every day in the world of wells, septic, water systems, home improvement, DIY projects, and all of that good stuff. And I look forward to talking to you guys tomorrow.